evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Proletarian. It's a bit of a bittersweet moment for me, as I'm sure you've surmised from reading the title of the video down below. The day has come for my 1999 BMW 323 and I to part ways, and so that's kind of unfortunate. I probably would have kept this car another 5, 10, I don't know how many years, but sometimes life happens in strange and unexpected ways. As I said, it's bittersweet. I am sorry to see this car go, but I don't have to get rid of it because of some massive catastrophic mechanical failure. I haven't fallen on hard times financially. I don't need the money to sell it. What I need is garage space, and there's something coming in, and so something's got to go out. And I'm not going to reveal what's coming in just yet. That will be coming up, and I'm going to keep that as a surprise. Tonight, I just want to try to pay a little bit of homage to this car. I've had it for about 6 years. It was my daily driver for about 4 of those years, and it's been a really great car. I haven't run into any of the problems that E36s are famous for. This is, of course, an E36 BMW. It's, in fact, the last of the E36s. Of course, by 1999, the sedan and the newly introduced wagon models had already moved on to the next E46 body style, but the coupes were still under development, and BMW ran the E36 for one last year. So this is really the last of its breed. And the E36 was very controversial when it came out. I don't think it ever really stopped being controversial, and it's largely a result of that the market today is still so soft for these cars. And I think that's really unfortunate because these are great drivers' cars. So anyway, I don't want to stretch this out too long. I want to do a quick walk around of the car before we run out of light. Take a look at the interior, take a look at the inside of the engine bay, maybe even take a look at the inside of the trunk, and then we're going to do a quick drive. Actually, I've already filmed the drive. I did it yesterday, and it's not the greatest. I really would have liked to have had more time to produce a little bit nicer homage to this car because it's been such a big part of my life for so many years. But essentially, the car is already sold, and what's incoming is going to be here in about a week, so I'm really under the gun, and I just really wanted to film something before this car left as a bit of a memory for myself and also to share it with you guys. So let's take a closer look at the car. So the most defining characteristic of the E36, and that which really set it apart from pretty much everything that came before it from the mid-1960s through the 1970s and 80s until its introduction, or at least all of the smaller cars, was its nose. Everything that came before the E36, the 2002, the earlier 3 Series, both the E21 and the E30, featured shark nose design language. The furthest point forward on the car was the leading edge of the hood. Everything else sloped back from there. And you could tell from looking at that you were looking at a BMW. You didn't even need to see the kidneys. You didn't need to see the headlight layout. All you needed to see was that shark nose design, that very square face with a reverse sloping grille, and you knew you were looking at a BMW. And the problem with that design, there are shark nose designs today that are very aerodynamic, but those old square BMWs really didn't have very good drag coefficients. And BMW was trying to solve that when they introduced the E36. And they did that by abandoning the shark nose design and adopting what they called a dolphin design. Now, I don't see a dolphin anywhere in here. I guess this projecting nose right here is a little bit like a bottlenose dolphin. I think the main idea was people liked the shark nose design. BMW wanted to get away from it, and they thought, well, you know, sharks are kind of scary and impressive. What impresses a shark? What scares a shark? A dolphin. So They wanted to go with a more aerodynamic shape. They've definitely got a lower coefficient of drag out of this car, but they really changed the design of the car and made it almost unrecognizable. Younger people today probably look at this and go, of course it looks like a BMW. This is a BMW. But back in those days, it really didn't look very much like a BMW, because now everything slopes to the rear. BMW did do a few design tricks, which I think are kind of interesting, and that's why I'm kneeling down here to show you. Because they lost that shark nose design, but they still wanted to carry certain design themes forward. The headlight layout is very similar to earlier cars. Of course, we've got the kidneys in the middle. The headlight layout is very similar, and after dark, if you look at this car in the dark with the headlights turned on, you say, well, of course it's a BMW. It looks like older BMWs. And that's because behind this rearward sloping plastic guard, if you look carefully, the headlights, which are laid out very similarly, are canted ever so slightly forward. Another design trick they did to trick the eye was this line on the turn signal. That gives the impression of the car leaning forward a little bit. And the leading edge of the grille is, the leading edge of the hood is still very far forward and overhangs the lights a little bit. And so even though the shape of the nose is completely different to everything that came before it, it has a little bit of that forward-reaching look to it, and I think it came out pretty well. It was very controversial. It's certainly not my favorite even today, but I do like the way it looks. But it lost a little something in the process. The thing about BMWs, everything that came before this, well, everything that came before the E30, they were sort of connoisseurs cars. They were enthusiasts cars. Before the E30 came out in the early 1980s, pretty much the only people that bought BMWs were driving enthusiasts. It was sort of like Germany's answer to Alfa Romeo or Lancia. And this car just, it's attractive. It's certainly more aerodynamic. And under the skin, when you're driving this, you immediately become aware that this, shares a lot of that DNA. This is a good old-fashioned BMW, but it looks like a German business sedan. It's lost a little bit of that aggressiveness, a little bit of that wildness to it, especially when you look at the M cars, the M3, for instance. The body on the M3 was virtually identical to this. The fender flares were gone. If there was a real problem with the E36, it's that it's too conservative. It looks about as exciting as a briefcase full of budget projections. But when you get in that seat and you turn the key and start driving it, you realize that enthusiast car is still inside here. And although this was a huge departure for BMW, and although the collector's market really hasn't started to appreciate these yet, I believe, I certainly would have held onto this car if I didn't have to make garage space. And I believe that in the future, this is going to go down in history as the very last of the analog 3 Series cars. When I say analog, it is dependent on electronics. There's a lot of electronic stuff going on in here. This was really the first sort of modern BMW. It was the first one with traction control, fairly primitive traction control, but traction control nonetheless, and kind of sophisticated computer management for the engine and all of the systems on board. But when I say that it's going to go down as one of the last analog BMWs, is underneath this hood, there's a normally aspirated inline 6, and there's an almost perfect weight distribution, 50-50, front and rear. I mean, 50% of the weight is on the front axle, 50% of the weight is on the rear axle, and BMW managed to do that with a big heavy engine out front here. They didn't try to make a mid-engine sports car or something. These cars were engineered to have good physical driving characteristics rather than using a computer to manage what's coming out of the rear wheels and make the car behave better. They did it with physics, and this is really the last car to do that. The E46 and everything that's come after that, they've become more and more and more dependent on electronics and less and less dependent on good physics and good engineering and good design. And that's why I really do love the E36, even though I've never really gotten very fond of this nose. But speaking of the normally aspirated inline-six engine, let's open up the hood and take a look at the engine bay. So the inside of the engine bay is all very conservative and pretty straightforward. We've got all the good old-fashioned systems. We've got hydraulic brakes. We've got hydraulic steering. We've got this wonderful naturally aspirated inline-six engine, which is unfortunately covered with this plastic shroud. But that thing just delivers power in a manner that I don't think a modern turbocharged four-cylinder engine could do. It's just so smooth and so wonderful. Even this big manifold here is fairly conventional looking. Now it's made out of some sort of synthetic material, which is a little disappointing. My old E30 had a cast aluminum manifold there, but so pretty much everything you would expect to see under there, and all very, very traditional. Although the car was a huge departure, it's 100% traditional BMW underneath. We'll just do a quick walk around here. So we're starting to run out of daylight, so I've abandoned the tripod and I'm just going handheld here. Now, if the front end of the E36 is controversial and sort of ugly, I would say that the rear end of the BMW is exactly the opposite. They abandoned the shark nose on the car, but you can see the car still has this lovely sort of reverse transom. That lowers the coefficient of drag. This little spoiler on here is one add-on that's not BMW. That's an eBay model. Somebody on eBay was selling those and color matching them. You could get them painted to the color code. So I added that on just for a little touch of style. I know it's not original, but it's still, I think it just gives the car a slightly more sporty look. The trunk is fairly straightforward. You've still got the original toolkit in here, which is actually still mostly full with BMW tools, all of which are made by Heiko or Heiko. These came standard. I mean, cars today, I don't know about modern BMWs, but you know, if you bought an old Mercedes or an old BMW, you got tools that could get you through most roadside emergencies. Tow hook there. Not sure. This doesn't look BMW at all. No, made in Japan. I think this is off of a Honda motorcycle or something, but that's kind of cool. The 6 CD changer still works. That's still in there. I've got a little bit of weed whacker string here for clearing out the sunroof drains when necessary. It's got a full-size spare under there on a steel rim, still brand new, never been out of the trunk. I'm not going to get all this stuff out of here because, again, I'm running out of light. The rear quarter view is also quite attractive. Another addition that I made, I wanted to keep the car period correct. It had 15-inch cast alloy BMW rims. I sourced these Borbets, which are period correct for the car, and I think they look a little bit more sporty than the originals, but still keep the car looking as it would have in the late 1990s. So we're definitely running out of light here. We'll take a look at the inside very quickly, and then we'll take it for a drive. So really no surprises inside the passenger cabin. The dashboard is pretty straightforward. We've got this driver-oriented center section of the dashboard with our computer down here, climate control here, very business-like BMW business radio. We've got the typically sagging glove box door. The only real problem with this car is there's no headliner. I had the cloth was coming delaminated from the ceiling of the car. I took it out. I bought a kit to try to replace that. And unfortunately, I was unsuccessful in re-gluing the fabric. Well, it's really getting dark in here now. I was unsuccessful in re-gluing the fabric on, and I left the ceiling out, and I've just never gotten around to it. And actually, there's a bit of an advantage. My wife very much dislikes this, but I actually have more headroom in here with the ceiling taken out, so I've just left it that way. So when this car first popped up on my radar about 6 years ago, I really wasn't actively car shopping. I was always more of an E30 fanboy than an E36 guy, but I was still mourning the loss of my last E30. I had an 86 325E, which suffered a rather untimely demise, and I was still kind of bummed out about that. And I really wasn't even in a financial position to buy a new car. But this one popped up locally. It was 16 years old with only 60,000 miles on it. Single owner. All the services had been done at the BMW dealer. It was kept inside. It was practically like brand new. And I knew it wasn't a practical daily driver at 16 years old. So I was buying it as a hobby car, but I had to do some financial wrangling. I had to do some rearranging, and I figured, well, I'll sell the car I'm driving now, and which I don't even remember what that was at the time. Now it must have been pretty forgettable. And I thought, well, I'll drive this for maybe 6 to 9 months. I'll get some things reorganized. I'll buy a new daily driver. And then I can focus on this as sort of a hobby car. And, well, as life tends to happen, 6 to 9 months turned into a year, which turned into 2 years, so on and so forth. And I ended up driving this car on a daily basis for a little over 4 years and effectively doubled the mileage. I think it was just about 60,000 when I bought it. And it has just over 120,000 on it now. And probably for the last 2 years or so, I've only maybe put 2,000 miles on it. But it's just been an incredibly good car. Like I said, I was always an E30 guy. And I remember I showed up to my first E36 local meet. And I was making my introductions with some of the other E36 guys, and they all wanted to know what my background was, and I said that I was coming out of an E30, and every single one of them was like, oh, an E30 and a 325E, oh, you're gonna hate the E36. And I was like, why? It seems like a great car. And of course they all said, well, it's much more complicated than the E30, much more difficult to work on, and it's just going to be much more of a pain in the neck. It's much more problematic. It's much more likely to break down. All kinds of electronic stuff goes bad on them. And I had like 3 guys leaning over the engine bay in my car, all looking down, and they're pointing out stuff. Well, you might as well just buy a new rack now. And that plastic radiator, those never last more than 80,000 miles. So you may as well get a new radiator now, because that's going to go bad. And that's going to go bad, and that's going to go bad. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Then I went on YouTube and I started watching all the videos about, well, you're not an E36 driver. if your if your window doesn't go back up automatically, and they push the button and the window goes back halfway and then it drops back down. Well, that doesn't happen here. I don't know. I guess I got a fluke, but this car has been remarkably trouble-free. And I think that speaks to the point, I think a lot of younger guys might get discouraged. I know I was certainly a lot more likely to get discouraged when I was young. I would get into conversations with enthusiasts when I first became interested in European cars. And there was the old saying, well, there's nothing so expensive as a cheap BMW, or there's nothing so expensive as a cheap Porsche, or there's nothing so expensive as a cheap Mercedes. And that does bear true to an extent. Regardless of how limited your finances are, you're always best off to buy the very, very best condition car you can afford. Don't buy the cheapest thing and think, well, I'll save the money for doing the repairs, because it's just never a good idea. And there are great cars out there. There's still great cars out there today. This car is still in remarkably good shape, and a young mechanic is buying it from me, and I'm sure it's going to get many more years of use. It would have gotten many more years of use in my care if my new edition wasn't on its way. And again, I'm not going to reveal what that is, but that'll be coming up soon enough. Hopefully this video and audio is coming out all right. I've never shot a driving video. Well, I have tried shooting driving videos before, but never entirely successfully. The microphone in that camera is just about worthless. It shoots good video, but the audio is terrible. And I tried using my iPhone with a lavalier mic yesterday to film a little bit, but it's a very simple mic, and the wire for the microphone was working as an antenna, I believe, and picking up all kinds of electronic noise in here. So the audio for this track is literally just coming off of my iPhone. I have my phone sitting on the seat here, and I'm just using the built-in microphone there to record the audio. So, and then I'll lay that track in on top of this video. So hopefully it comes out well. But again, I'm kind of under the gun. I didn't really have an opportunity to shoot this thing in the correct style. But I will be doing more driving videos for sure in the future. And I'm definitely going to work on my production value. But this has just been a great car. It still feels very modern. I've had a lot of people, some of whom aren't really car people, sitting in that passenger seat telling me, this doesn't feel like a 20-year-old car. It just seems very tight and new. And it is. It's very, very responsive. It still handles. The steering is still very tight. There's no slack in the wheel whatsoever. Throttle response is, just instantaneous. You step on the gas and the car just takes off. It's unbelievable. 4,000 RPMs, and it just feels like you're doing 20 miles an hour. 4,000 RPMs in third gear, and it felt like I was doing 20 miles an hour, and I'm doing 55. And that's the great thing about these old-fashioned, naturally aspirated inline-six BMWs, is just that snappy throttle response. And of course, the 323 was the smallest engine you could get, unless you went down to one of the 1.8 liter hatchbacks in the E36 line. It's no powerhouse by any means. I think this car made 180 horsepower when it was brand new. I imagine it's probably lost a few in the intervening years, but all in all, it's just been really, really, really great. And everything about it is just so wonderful. I love the driver-oriented center portion of the dashboard. The gauges are all well laid out there. It's unfortunate it is a little short on instrumentation. Other than a temperature gauge, it would be nice if this had an amp meter on the dashboard and an oil pressure gauge instead of idiot lights. But all in all, I don't know. I couldn't really ask for a much better car than this. I wish I had time to do a more involved video. But I'm glad that I got a little bit of driving filming in, and I guess it's time to wrap this up because I really need to move on to the next chapter in this story. So I'm going to end up really missing this car. It was a great car. I'm sure that it's going to a good home. I think it's going to have a much more active lifestyle than it has over the last 2 years in my storage unit. And I'm really looking forward to moving on to the next chapter in this story. So if you want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the channel, and if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, like, share, tell your friends. All those things go a long way to help me out. I'm going to try producing some other regular videos very soon. And when my new arrival gets here, I'm going to be sure to start working on a proper homage video. It's just going to be a little bit better than this one, hopefully, for that car. So I look forward to seeing each of you here when that happens. Later, guys.